Explosions light the night sky over the Ardennes. German soldiers stumble through the smoke, terrified by threats they cannot see. In Berlin, whispers of America's secret weapons spread like wildfire. Blueprints that could obliterate the Wehrmacht before the Battle of the Bulge even begins. Hitler's final winter gamble teeters on the edge of disaster. The deadliest winter of the war is about to erupt.
December 1944. Berlin, the heart of a crumbling Reich, feels colder than usual. Snow drifts along the cobblestone streets, covering the cracks in buildings that bear the scars of years of relentless Allied bombing. Deep within the gray, echoing halls of the Kriegsmarine and Wehrmacht command centers, a storm of anxiety brews. Whispers move faster than the telephone lines, faster than the cars rushing along the snowy avenues. The United States has done something no German strategist anticipated. It has revealed blueprints for secret weapons, designs so advanced, so revolutionary, that generals, men who had faced Normandy, Anzio, and the relentless march of Allied forces across Europe, pause to comprehend them. Panic spreads through Berlin like wildfire. The upper echelons of command gather in dimly lit rooms, leafing through reports that describe machines and strategies capable of crushing the Wehrmacht's armored formations before the Battle of the Bulge even begins. Across the Reich, officers in various units read fragmented intelligence, hearsay, and leaks. A Panzer division commander in Cologne reads a report of an American armored behemoth capable of traversing forests, snow, and trenches with unstoppable force. In the streets of Munich, military couriers clutch yellow documents describing secret bombs capable of severing supply lines with surgical precision. The Reichstag whispers that the Allies possess technology that could make entire divisions vanish before they reach the front lines. In the command rooms, tension is almost tangible. Generals argue about whether to redistribute Panzer divisions to intercept these new threats, or to stick with Hitler's plan for the Ardennes offensive. Some officers argue feverishly, "We cannot let them anticipate our moves." Others counter, "We cannot delay. The Western Front is already stretched too thin." Field marshals pace the rooms, cigars clutched in trembling hands, as aides scribble frantic notes. Every telephone ring, every messenger, every telegram carries the weight of potential catastrophe. Berlin, once confident, now quivers in uncertainty.
The psychological impact is immense. For decades, the Wehrmacht had relied on its formidable combination of armor, infantry, and air support to dominate European battlefields. Now, intelligence reports hint at a force that combines unprecedented armored vehicles, mechanized infantry, aerial superiority, and covert weaponry, all coordinated to strike simultaneously. No general alive has planned for this. Soldiers, unaware of the precise nature of these secret weapons, march through frost-laden forests, their eyes wary, their hearts heavy with fear of the unknown. In barracks and mess halls, whispers of American innovations spread faster than any official communique. The fear is contagious. Fear that the very foundation of the German offensive, tanks, artillery, and supply lines, could be annihilated before it is fully deployed. Meanwhile, in factories across the Reich, engineers scramble to devise countermeasures. Blueprints are examined and re-examined under dim lights. Calculations are scribbled on blackboards in haste. The message is clear: adapt quickly or watch the Reich crumble. Workers and designers labor, often through nights without sleep, constructing prototypes of defensive equipment, modifying existing Panzer tanks, reinforcing bunkers, and considering new anti-air strategies. Every cog in the machinery of German war production now feels the weight of this revelation. The Reich is forced to fight not only on the battlefields, but in the minds of its commanders, engineers, and soldiers. A psychological war of anticipation, desperation, and sheer terror. Even at the front lines in the Ardennes, the effect is palpable. Soldiers notice unusual movements in the forests, strange vehicles glimpsed at dawn, unfamiliar aircraft shadowing patrols, and whispers of bombs capable of striking before the front is even engaged. Morale, already fragile from months of grueling winter combat, frays further. Letters home hint at anxiety and unease, a creeping understanding that the enemy knows secrets too devastating to ignore. For the first time, German troops confront the possibility that the war may be slipping out of their hands, not because of courage or skill, but because of information, intelligence, and technology operating in ways they cannot yet see.
By the end of December, Berlin's halls of power are suffused with tension, like a city holding its breath before an imminent storm. Officers adjust maps, call in reconnaissance, and double-check logistics, but the sense of inevitability looms. The blueprints have changed the rules of the game. What was once predictable, calculable, and rehearsed is now uncertain, unpredictable, and terrifying. The revelation of American secret weapons is not merely news, it is a catalyst that reshapes strategy, psychology, and ultimately the fate of the Battle of the Bulge. And as whispers reach the furthest corners of the Reich, the Germans realize that the war may have already been rewritten in the quiet rooms of U.S. laboratories, far from the snow-covered forests where their fate awaits.
By the end of December 1944, the whispers of secret American weapons had become a tangible terror. Berlin was not the only place quivering under the revelation. Throughout the Reich, from the fortified bunkers along the Siegfried Line to the snow-laden forests of the Ardennes, German officers and soldiers faced the terrifying possibility that their carefully laid plans might be rendered obsolete before a single shot was fired. The blueprints did not simply outline new tanks or bombs. They revealed a revolution in the art of war itself. Among the most alarming disclosures were the enhancements to the Sherman tanks. Upgraded armor, longer barrels, and mechanized support units promised mobility and firepower previously unseen on the European battlefield. Unlike the cumbersome Panzer IVs and even the feared Panther tanks, these Shermans could maneuver across forests and frozen streams with unprecedented speed, striking supply lines and outflanking defensive positions in ways the Germans had never anticipated. Reconnaissance reports suggested that these tanks would be deployed en masse, their coordinated assaults timed to exploit every weakness in German formations. Commanders in Cologne, Aachen, and Liège scribbled frantic counterplans, but no formula seemed sufficient to halt a mechanized force this adaptive. Air superiority, the domain the Luftwaffe had once dominated, was also under threat. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, the pride of Germany, could no longer guarantee control of the skies. Blueprints hinted at American fighters with improved speed, enhanced maneuverability, and long-range bombing capabilities. Radar-controlled coordination meant these aircraft could strike simultaneously in multiple locations, supporting ground assaults with deadly precision.
German pilots who had trained for years in classical air combat were now forced to imagine enemies with tactics and technologies that defied everything they had learned. Every sortie could encounter a foe whose capabilities were still shrouded in secrecy, making the skies themselves a theater of fear.
Yet the most chilling details concerned covert weapons, devices engineered to destabilize supply lines, disrupt communications, and render entire divisions ineffective before the front lines engaged. Experimental bombs designed for precision strikes against bridges, railways, and armored columns promised not just destruction, but the psychological terror of unpredictability. The concept of an invisible threat, striking without warning, introduced a new paradigm of warfare, where information and timing mattered more than sheer numbers. Engineers in Berlin scrambled to devise countermeasures, but the United States had already anticipated many of their possible responses. Even on the ground, the German army felt the pressure. Reports from reconnaissance units highlighted unfamiliar equipment moving under the cover of night. Vehicles capable of navigating forests silently, dropping explosives without detection. Rumors spread among infantry units that entire armored columns could vanish overnight, not through cunning maneuvers, but because enemy technology had anticipated every German step. Morale, already frayed from months of grueling winter operations, trembled further as soldiers tried to reconcile the reality of these new threats with the rigid doctrines drilled into them since the beginning of the war. Strategically, the implications were staggering. American planners were no longer fighting a traditional war. They had created a chessboard where pieces moved before the opponent even understood the rules. Sherman tanks were the knights, Messerschmitts the bishops, covert bombs the rooks, each element coordinated for maximum disruption. German generals faced a dilemma: attempt to counter these innovations with existing forces or risk total collapse. Every night in Berlin, maps were redrawn, orders reconsidered, and contingencies debated. But the sense of inevitability persisted. The technology revealed in those blueprints was more than machinery. It was a demonstration that warfare had evolved while Germany remained trapped in the tactics of the past.
By the Ardennes, soldiers could feel the invisible pressure mounting. Reports of strange silhouettes moving in the snow, fleeting glimpses of machines that defied classification, and aerial patterns that did not match any Luftwaffe protocol kept nerves taut. Supply lines that had once been secure now appeared fragile under the threat of covert operations. The Germans realized with dawning horror that the battle they had anticipated, a frontal clash in the snow, might never occur on the terms they expected. Instead, they were being forced into a war of shadows and surprises, where the true weapon was the ability to see and strike first. As January approached, Berlin faced a grim truth. These blueprints were not merely plans. They were a manifesto of American innovation and strategic foresight. Every detail revealed a calculated advantage, every sketch a challenge to German assumptions, and every page an unspoken promise that, when the Battle of the Bulge commenced, it would not be a battle fought evenly, but a confrontation heavily skewed by intelligence, technology, and timing. The Reich had glimpsed the future, and it was terrifying.
Technology alone does not win wars. Human decisions, morale, and leadership determine outcomes as much as tanks, bombs, or aircraft.
In December 1944, the revelation of American secret weapon blueprints created a psychological shockwave through the German military hierarchy. Field marshals and generals, men hardened by campaigns across France, Italy, and the Eastern Front, found themselves wrestling with uncertainty. The intelligence they received was precise enough to terrify, but incomplete enough to leave them guessing. In Berlin, command meetings became exercises in tension and paranoia. Maps were spread across oak tables, marked with colored pins representing Panzer divisions, mechanized infantry, and key strategic points. One general, tapping a trembling finger against a map, argued for the immediate diversion of his tanks to intercept the rumored American advances. Another countered, insisting the Ardennes offensive must proceed. Any hesitation, he warned, could cost the Reich the entire Western Front. Their voices rose and fell like the creaking of the city's ancient beams, each word carrying the weight of potential disaster. A single miscalculation could turn months of careful preparation into rubble. Meanwhile, soldiers on the front lines felt the invisible pressure. Infantry units marching through snow-laden forests of the Ardennes noticed anomalies. Unidentifiable vehicles glimpsed in moonlight, aircraft performing maneuvers they had not seen before, and subtle disturbances in supply lines. Fear spread quietly, not through gunfire, but through whispered conversations in freezing trenches, in mess halls, and in temporary encampments. Men questioned what they had been trained to trust: the stability of their positions, the predictability of enemy movements, and the supremacy of the Panzer. Morale, already strained by harsh winter conditions, frayed further under the weight of uncertainty.
Across the Atlantic, the human component of the American war machine worked tirelessly to exploit these fears. Engineers, intelligence officers, and pilots coordinated in secret laboratories and airfields, running simulations that anticipated every conceivable German response. Every prototype, every test flight, and every calculated strike was designed not only to deliver physical damage, but to create psychological impact. Soldiers and commanders alike were kept guessing, forced to operate in an environment where anticipation and foresight determined survival. Even within German factories, the human factor manifested in desperation. Engineers worked around the clock, attempting to modify existing Panzer tanks to match the American threat. Designers revised blueprints for anti-aircraft guns, while laborers endured long hours under freezing conditions, producing components for new defensive measures. The Reich was waging a war within its own borders as much as on the battlefield. A battle of intellect, innovation, and nerve. Each night in Berlin, generals lay awake, imagining hypothetical scenarios in which entire armored columns were rendered useless before reaching the front. The mental strain mirrored the physical exhaustion of troops exposed to relentless winter combat. Back in the Ardennes, fear became tangible. Soldiers whispered of ghost machines and invisible bombs, their imaginations fueled by partial reports and the knowledge that the Allies were advancing in secrecy. Officers had to balance the dissemination of intelligence with the need to maintain morale, a delicate task that could mean life or death. Orders were given cautiously, reconnaissance missions executed meticulously, and every movement scrutinized for potential exposure to the enemy's hidden advantages. Human decisions, more than any technological marvel, now held the power to shape the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge. Each choice carried cascading consequences, each hesitation or misjudgment potentially catastrophic. The Americans had engineered an advantage not solely through machinery, but by understanding how fear, confusion, and the anticipation of unknown threats could paralyze even the most disciplined army. By manipulating the human element, the Allies had turned information into a weapon, one that struck not only at tanks and troops, but at the minds of those who commanded and fought them. As the last days of December approached, Berlin's halls of command remained tense and silent, filled with men who understood that the coming winter would test not only their military might, but their ability to think, adapt, and survive. The human factor, leadership, morale, and perception, was now the battlefield's most decisive weapon, and the Americans had positioned themselves to exploit it fully. By late December 1944, the war in Europe had entered a critical phase. The Allies, leveraging the revelations of secret weaponry, had effectively redrawn the map of conflict. In Washington and London, military planners treated the Ardennes not simply as a winter battlefield, but as a chessboard where every move, every division, every sortie, every artillery shell was calculated in advance. Intelligence indicated that Germany would launch a desperate counteroffensive, relying on Panzer divisions and remaining Luftwaffe assets to strike a decisive blow before American reinforcements could fully deploy. Yet the U.S. had anticipated this. Sherman tanks were not simply massed in linear formations. They were deployed in staggered, flexible units capable of flanking, breaking supply chains, and neutralizing Panzer positions with precision fire. Each tank platoon had integrated air support, using reconnaissance from high-altitude planes to detect German movements before they occurred. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulf fighters of the Luftwaffe, once feared dominators of the skies, found themselves confronting American P-51 Mustangs with longer range, faster climb rates, and unprecedented coordination. The air war was now a carefully orchestrated dance, with the Americans dictating the tempo. On the German side, commanders attempted to adapt. Panzer divisions were redeployed to intercept anticipated Sherman advances, while artillery units shifted to cover key crossings and bottlenecks. But the Americans had anticipated even these adjustments. Their planners had calculated reaction times, supply line vulnerabilities, and troop fatigue, designing attacks to exploit every possible gap in German defenses. The result was a chessboard, where each piece moved before the opponent could respond, where every maneuver forced a decision under duress, and where hesitation could be fatal. The terrain itself played a role in this strategic game. Ardennes forests, blanketed in snow, constricted movement and created natural choke points. Sherman tanks, with upgraded suspension and armored protection, could traverse frozen streams and forest trails that would trap heavier German panzers. Air reconnaissance provided precise mapping of terrain obstacles, enabling American units to exploit forest clearings and hidden valleys for ambushes. Every ridge, stream, and road became a tactical opportunity, a calculated advantage in a game where knowledge outweighed raw strength. Psychological warfare intertwined with strategy. Intelligence leaks and reports of secret American devices created doubt in German ranks, forcing commanders to second-guess orders and slow decision-making.
Even as Panzer crews prepared for frontal engagements, the fear of unseen weapons, precision bombs, rapid deployment Shermans, or airstrikes eroded confidence. This uncertainty amplified the effectiveness of American strategy. The Germans were not merely facing physical attacks, but a constant mental calculus that taxed leadership at every level.
Coordination between units was another decisive factor. Infantry, armor, and air units were no longer operating in isolation. Sherman tanks would strike in conjunction with infantry advancing through forested gaps, while Mustangs provided cover and reconnaissance. Artillery barrages were timed to disrupt expected counterattacks, and mobile engineers cleared obstacles to maintain momentum. American planners understood that warfare was no longer a sequence of isolated engagements, but a continuous, interconnected series of maneuvers designed to anticipate and overwhelm. As the Ardennes snow thickened and the Germans prepared their counteroffensive, the strategic chessboard set by the Americans was nearly complete. Every piece, every plan, every maneuver anticipated the opposition. The Battle of the Bulge was about to begin, but not on terms dictated by Hitler or his generals. The Allies had transformed the battlefield into a carefully orchestrated sequence of actions and reactions, a war of anticipation and timing, where knowledge was the ultimate weapon. The Germans could still fight, but they were now playing a game where the rules had been rewritten, and the Americans held the first move.
As the first light of January 16, 1945, pierced the snowy Ardennes forest, the Battle of the Bulge officially began. But the battle did not erupt as a simple frontal clash. It unfolded like a calculated dance, choreographed by intelligence, timing, and technological superiority. Sherman tanks, hidden under tree lines and behind ridges, advanced with precision, while American infantry moved in synchronized waves through snow-covered paths. Every motion had been rehearsed, every angle anticipated, turning the German perception of the battlefield upside down. Panzer divisions, primed for a decisive push, were the first to encounter this new reality. The heavy armor of Panther and Tiger tanks, designed to dominate, suddenly faced Shermans with upgraded firepower and maneuverability in unexpected positions. German crews, expecting linear confrontations, now contended with tanks appearing from unseen flanks, striking supply columns and disrupting formations with ruthless efficiency. The psychological shock was immediate. Soldiers who had trained for months in rigid tactical doctrine now faced a dynamic, unpredictable opponent. Above them, the Luftwaffe struggled to assert dominance. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s attempted sorties, only to find P-51 Mustangs intercepting with coordinated precision. Long-range reconnaissance allowed Americans to anticipate flight paths and bombardments, using superior coordination to protect advancing Sherman units. The skies were no longer dominated by experience or raw skill alone. Technology and timing created a deadly advantage that forced German pilots into reactive patterns, eroding their confidence and effectiveness.
Meanwhile, the hidden weapons revealed in the secret blueprints, experimental bombs, portable anti-tank devices, and rapid deployment explosives began to alter the dynamics of the front. Supply convoys, which the Germans assumed were secure, were struck with surgical precision. Bridges disappeared overnight, tracks were sabotaged, and isolated Panzer units found themselves cut off from reinforcements.
The battlefield, once predictable in German calculations, became a maze of uncertainty. Commanders struggled to coordinate counterattacks, often delayed by misinformation or by the fear of unseen threats. Infantry units experienced the chilling effect of these innovations firsthand. Moving through forests blanketed in snow, soldiers heard distant artillery in places that maps had not indicated. Sherman tanks emerged unexpectedly, their engines muffled by the terrain, their fire accurate and devastating. German foot soldiers, accustomed to leading armored advances, now found themselves reacting to technology they had not trained to face. Panic rippled quietly through ranks as every new encounter reminded them that the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed.
At the strategic level, American commanders monitored the unfolding chaos with meticulous attention. Radio operators and reconnaissance units provided real-time updates, allowing Sherman and infantry units to adjust positions dynamically. Artillery fire was coordinated to exploit weaknesses revealed by reconnaissance, and air support responded instantly to any German maneuver. This integration of intelligence, technology, and human decision-making demonstrated that the opening moves were more than a battle. They were a demonstration of operational mastery. By nightfall, the Germans faced a sobering reality. Their calculated offensive had already been disrupted. Panzer divisions were scattered, supply lines severed, and morale increasingly brittle. Sherman tanks had demonstrated not just mechanical superiority, but strategic flexibility and coordination. The opening moves of the Battle of the Bulge had set the tone. The Allies dictated tempo, controlled engagement zones, and transformed previously reliable German assumptions into liabilities. A war that had once seemed balanced now tilted sharply under the shadow of American ingenuity.
As the snow deepened over the Ardennes, a hidden advantage began to reveal itself, one that the Germans had neither anticipated nor prepared for. The secret blueprints of American weapons were no longer abstract concepts. Their execution on the battlefield became terrifyingly real. Experimental bombs, mobile demolition units, and rapid deployment Sherman formations struck with a precision that seemed almost supernatural, leaving German commanders scrambling for answers. The hidden edge was not merely technological. It was the synergy of intelligence, timing, and human decision-making, a combination the Germans had never faced before. Supply lines, long thought secure, were systematically dismantled. Convoys disappeared overnight. Bridges vanished under expertly timed demolitions, and rail networks became death traps for panzer divisions attempting to advance. Engineers in Berlin raced to reinforce structures and devise countermeasures, but every effort was met with American anticipation. It was as though the battlefield itself had become a living entity, favoring those who had planned meticulously and punishing those relying on outdated assumptions. Sherman tanks, previously underestimated by German intelligence, exploited every opportunity the terrain offered. Forested ridges, frozen streams, and narrow passes became conduits for rapid, unpredictable assaults. German panzer units, expecting linear engagements, were forced into reactive positions, often caught in crossfires or blocked by terrain they had assumed would offer safe passage. Every skirmish reinforced the psychological impact of the Americans' hidden advantage. No longer could the Germans rely solely on firepower or experience. They were now facing an opponent who had anticipated every possible move.
The Luftwaffe, too, suffered from this hidden edge.
Messerschmitts attempting to provide air support were intercepted by P-51 Mustangs with uncanny precision. Radar-guided coordination allowed American pilots to strike simultaneously at multiple points, neutralizing threats before they could fully materialize. German pilots reported confusion, disorientation, and frustration, realizing that the skies were no longer theirs to command. Even elite Luftwaffe units, trained and seasoned through years of conflict, could not overcome the combination of superior planning, technology, and intelligence. Psychological warfare intertwined with tangible results. Rumors of unseen devices, mobile bombs, Sherman units appearing from impossible directions, and airstrikes timed with near omniscience spread rapidly. Soldiers whispered of ghost weapons, and fear quietly but relentlessly undermined cohesion. Commanders had to weigh every order against the possibility of surprise, delaying decisions and reducing operational efficiency. The hidden edge was working silently, invisibly, but its effects were unmistakable. Chaos in the German ranks, hesitation in leadership, and vulnerability across the battlefield.
Even minor skirmishes reflected this advantage. Infantry, encountering small groups of Sherman tanks, often found themselves outmaneuvered and forced to retreat. Bridges demolished in advance blocked Panzer movements, forcing units to detour through exposed terrain. Every disruption, however small, had a cascading effect, delaying reinforcements, sapping morale, and amplifying the effectiveness of coordinated American assaults. The Germans were trapped in a web of their own miscalculations, woven by a foe who had anticipated them at every turn. By the end of the first week of January, the Battle of the Bulge had transformed. What had begun as a German initiative was now a reactive struggle against a hidden, multi-layered advantage. The secret blueprints, once mere diagrams in a Washington office, had become decisive instruments of war. Americans had turned intelligence and technology into psychological leverage, and the Germans were left to fight not only the battle in the snow, but the uncertainty and fear that the hidden edge imposed upon every decision, every movement, and every soldier.
By mid-January 1945, the tide of the Battle of the Bulge had irrevocably turned. What began as Hitler's bold counteroffensive now unraveled under the weight of American planning, intelligence, and technological superiority. Panzer divisions, once the spearhead of Germany's Western Front, were battered and disoriented. Sherman tanks, executing coordinated flanking maneuvers, had neutralized key positions and disrupted supply lines, leaving German units isolated and vulnerable. The hidden American advantage, the blueprints for secret weapons, proved decisive. Experimental bombs destroyed critical bridges and rail networks before the Germans could react. Mobile demolition units blocked retreat paths, while rapid deployment Sherman teams struck with near-perfect timing. Every layer of German strategy seemed anticipated, every maneuver countered, leaving commanders to grapple with confusion and mounting losses. The battlefield was no longer contested on equal terms. The Allies dictated tempo, territory, and the sequence of engagement. Morale within the German ranks crumbled. Soldiers who had marched through months of bitter winter combat faced an enemy that seemed omnipresent, appearing where least expected. Panzer crews, frustrated by Sherman's emerging from unseen positions, struggled to maintain cohesion. Luftwaffe pilots, unable to penetrate coordinated P-51 defenses, reported mounting casualties and failed sorties. Berlin's command centers, once brimming with confidence, now echoed with urgent orders, panic, and the realization that the counteroffensive was failing. American commanders, conversely, were executing a masterclass in integrated warfare. Infantry, armor, and air units operated in unison, guided by real-time intelligence. Engineers and reconnaissance teams ensured mobility and flexibility, while artillery support neutralized expected German movements. The synergy between technology and human decision-making allowed the Allies to respond rapidly, strike precisely, and maintain operational momentum, transforming initial defensive actions into a decisive advantage. By late January, German forces began to retreat. Key objectives, including strategic crossroads and supply depots, remained in American hands. The Battle of the Bulge, once a threat to the Allied advance into Western Europe, had become a testament to the effectiveness of intelligence, innovation, and tactical foresight. The Germans had fought valiantly, but against an opponent who had anticipated, calculated, and manipulated every factor, their efforts were insufficient. The broader impact of these secret weapons and the strategies built around them extended beyond the Ardennes. The psychological blow, the disruption of supply lines, and the operational superiority achieved in these weeks reshaped German planning for the remainder of the war. Commanders became cautious, morale remained fragile, and the strategic initiative shifted irreversibly to the Allies. In a winter forest where the snow seemed endless and the cold merciless, the hidden edge of American ingenuity had rewritten the rules of engagement, proving that foresight, preparation, and technological innovation could turn even a desperate enemy offensive into a strategic victory. The Battle of the Bulge concluded not only with maps marked in red and blue, but with a stark lesson. The combination of intelligence, technology, and human decision-making could decisively influence outcomes in modern warfare. The secret blueprints, once confined to Washington offices, had manifested on European soil with tangible destructive power, changing the trajectory of the war and cementing the Allies' momentum toward ultimate victory. The Battle of the Bulge was not just a clash of armies, it was a confrontation of foresight, innovation, and human resolve. America's secret edge reshaped the battlefield, turning fear into leverage and strategy into decisive action. In the frozen Ardennes, every choice mattered, every moment counted, and as the echoes of artillery faded, one question lingered. How much of victory is determined by what we see, and how much by what remains hidden?